hope you enjoyed your trip through the mines. We talk so much of Athens' glory, but we often forget the city's power was due to tremendous amounts of work. Work that often had a great human cost. What else would you like to do? Of course! Please follow me!
Welcome, visitor, to where Spartan boys become Spartan men. My name is Leonidas. I am a king of Sparta. But do not think me some idle aristocrat softened by luxury. When Spartans go to war, I stand alongside them, shield to shield. And my spear tastes the same blood as those of my men. I can't help but be reminded of the boy I used to be. I wonder what that boy would think if he saw me today. Would he be proud? Intimidated? Or would he pity the tired old man standing in front of him? But such thoughts are meaningless. Let us move on. The Agogi was Sparta's strict education system. This strenuous regimen took in the young boys, and then reshaped them until nothing was left but the strength, intelligence, and resolve of a perfect Spartan citizen. I will find you once your visit has ended, and we will talk further. Until then, visitor.
Sparta was a Greek city located in the Peloponnese. It differed from other cities of the time in that it had no walls. Sparta originated as 4 neighboring villages: Patane, Limnes, Mizoa, and Cynosura, all of which shared the same political, military, and religious life. After 2 wars with the Messenians, the city's territory expanded even further. By the 5th century BCE, they allegedly controlled almost half of the Peloponnese. The Agoge was the military training and education program undergone by Sparta's male youth. Grooming men for war was one of the city's main priorities. Boys began their training at the young age of 7 and completed it when they were 30. It has been said that Spartan infants were inspected for weakness shortly after birth. If they were deemed too sickly, they were thrown into chasms. However, this information remains unproven. The healthy boys were considered suitable for training. When they came of age, They were removed from their families and were placed into service of the state. Their education included subjects like reading, writing, and even music, but was mostly focused on tough military exercises meant to turn the boys into efficient soldiers. The agoge was divided into 3 cycles. One for boys aged 7 to 12, one for adolescents aged 12 to 20, and one for men aged 20 to 30. Each cycle included different exercises for refining the body and mind. Sparta played a large role in defeating the Persians during the Greco-Persian Wars in the 5th century BCE. They held their king Leonidas's glorious death at the Battle of Thermopylae in particularly high esteem. Because Leonidas was killed in battle, Sparta believed he died a good death and showed incredible bravery, qualities to be held as a model for all Spartans. This idealized bravery was embedded in the city's collective memory and was the main quality people strove for in the agoge. The first cycle of the agoge focused on boys aged 7 to 12. Each of the boys had shaved heads and wore light clothing. They walked everywhere barefoot, swam the Odyssey River all year long, slept on reeds, and participated in cult rituals for Artemis or Thea. The boys were grouped into herds, or agoli, and were supervised by older adolescents. Once they reached the age of 12, they entered the second cycle of the agoge, which aimed to integrate them into the society of citizen soldiers. The agoge's second cycle included boys aged 12 to 20. When they reached the age of 20, the young men were dubbed Erinyes and could officially serve as hoplites in the Spartan army. Until the age of 30, Spartan men lived in communal mess halls called Sosgenia. From the age of 22 onward, they were permitted to start a family, but 30 was viewed as a more appropriate age to get married. Spartan men served in the military until they turned 60, when they were designated as elders, or gerontes. However, many were known to continue serving anyway, such as King Archimedes III, who fought in the army until he was killed in battle at the age of 62. All adult male Spartans participated in communal meals called syssitia. The attending Spartans contributed different kinds of food on a monthly basis, in addition to a small sum of money to pay for meat. Each man was entitled to one portion of a meal, with the exception of the kings, who received 2 portions. Syssitia attendance was mandatory for every Spartan fortunate enough to be part of the group. The meals had great political significance. According to Xenophon and Plutarch, the syssitia was designed to foster a sense of equality between citizens. It also demonstrated the self-restraint and moderation of Spartan society. But in reality, the syssitia only increased the differentiation between the rich and the poor. Those who could not afford to contribute to the communal food not only missed their meals, but also lost their right of citizenship.
Your tour has ended. As you have seen, the Arogi was not for the weak or faint of heart. But it did its job in producing skilled warriors and shrewd citizens. What else would you like to do? Very well. Follow me.
Welcome, traveler, to the Sanctuary of Asclepios, a place of rest and healing. The Sanctuary of Asclepios is an amazing place, even for those with only a passing interest in medicine. It was a fascinating location, combining the mystical, religious, and scientific. And if someone happened to pass out, they'd luckily be surrounded by skilled physicians. This is the Sanctuary of Asclepios, the god of medicine. It was here that the sick and weary came, seeking cures for their ailments. Sometimes the medical practitioners provided the cures, and sometimes the healing came from the gods themselves. This tour will help explain the inner workings of the sanctuary, as well as the unique way the Greeks approached medicine. I hope you enjoy yourself. I'll be waiting for you at the end of your visit.
The ill and infirm came to this sanctuary to pray and offer sacrifices to Asclepios, the god of medicine. According to myth, Asclepios was once a mortal physician who eventually became a god. He had many sanctuaries across Greece, but the most famous was in Epidaurus. When pilgrims passed through the entrance of the sanctuary, they could read this inscription: "When you enter the abode of the god which smells of incense, you must be pure, and thought is pure when you think with piety."
Τι στον κόρα κάνει.
Medical steles constituted a sort of hub between medicine, religion, and the divine. They were slabs with inscriptions that praised Asclepios' virtues and merit and described his methods of healing. The inscriptions relayed the dreams patients had within the abaton, one of the most important buildings in the sanctuary. The steles outlined the patient's name, their disease, and how they were cured by Asclepios. They were probably written by the sanctuary's priests, or at least under the priest's supervision. Asclepios was a complex deity. In addition to being a god, he was also a trained physician and disciple of the centaur Chiron. In ancient Greece, religion was inseparable from rites, processions, and sacrifices. This was no different in Epidaurus, and visitors to Asclepios' sanctuary needed to prepare themselves accordingly. Pilgrims cleaned themselves in order to be pure, then offered Asclepios food like honey cakes, cheesecakes, baked meats, and figs. The food was placed on the sanctuary's holy table, where it was presumably later taken by priests. After the preliminary offerings, visitors were allowed to enter the abaton, where they would hopefully encounter Asclepios in a dream. Medical steles also mention that healed patients sometimes gave additional offerings to Asclepios as thanks for being cured. Asclepios was originally born a mortal, and was the product of an affair between the god Apollo and a mortal, Coronis. Apollo killed Coronis after discovering she had been unfaithful, and ordered her body burned on a funeral pyre. However, he rescued his unborn child from Coronis' womb before the fire consumed her body. Apollo gave the baby to the centaur Chiron, who raised Asclepios and taught him to practice medicine. Over time, Asclepios became so skilled in the art of healing, he could even raise the dead. This angered Zeus, who sent Asclepios to Hades with a thunderbolt. Apollo retaliated by killing the Cyclopes responsible for making Zeus's thunderbolts. Then, Zeus revived Asclepios, making him immortal and deifying him in the process. In sculptures, pottery, mosaics, and coins, Asclepios was portrayed holding a staff intertwined with a sacred snake. The staff is a symbol of medicine that still endures to this day. The Epitouteon was the priest's residence. As the link between patients and the gods, priests were essential to the operation of the sanctuary. They were often elected into the priesthood for one-year periods, but buy themselves a position if they were wealthy enough. In addition to interpreting patients' dreams in the abaton, priests both supervised and performed sacrifices and rituals. During these functions, they were usually clad in white. The abaton was built in the northern boundary of the sanctuary, where it surrounded a sacred well whose water was believed to have therapeutic properties. The abaton was where pilgrims went for incubation, or dream rituals. Details of the incubation ritual have been described in unearthed medical steles. They were also noted in Aristophanes' play Plutus, which featured a more comedic view of the process. Incubation was the dream ritual pilgrims experienced in the abaton. After completing the necessary preliminary rituals, pilgrims were allowed to enter the sacred building, where they lay prone. As they took in the smell of burning incense, the sanctuary's priests extinguished the oil lamps and asked them to sleep in silence. Once they were asleep, Asclepios would appear in their dreams and give his medical advice. The advice included diet and treatment recommendations, as well as requests for specific offerings or religious rituals. Upon waking up, priests interpreted the patient's dreams, unless a patient had been miraculously healed in their sleep. However, if a patient was completely beyond help, they were removed from the abaton. This was to adhere to a ritual law that stated that no one could die or be born within the building.
I see you've completed the tour. I hope you enjoyed your time in the sanctuary. As you can see, gods and miracles were just as important to the healing process as medicine was. Now, what else would you like to do? As you wish, traveler. Follow me. Welcome to Gnossos, traveler, where the Minotaur once prowled. Gnossos was the seat of the old Minoan civilization, where King Minos once supposedly ruled. These ruins have been the backdrop for many important events in both history and mythology. Look for me when your visit is over, and we'll discuss what you've seen.
The island of Crete was first settled around 8000 BCE. Over time, significant towns and maritime trade began to develop. Palaces were built, destroyed, and then rebuilt, culminating in what archaeologists call the Neopalatial period, which began around 1700 BCE. This period lasted for over 300 years and is considered the golden age of Minoan civilization. The largest palace of this period was located in Knossos and featured maze-like complexes of workshops, temples, courts, throne rooms, and living areas, as well as paved roads and advanced plumbing and draining. Trade and external relations were important to the Minoans, and their networks extended across the eastern Mediterranean. As a result, the people of Crete and the lands they traded with often influenced each other and exchanged ideas, usually through peaceful interactions instead of military conflict. The settlement of Knossos was established as early as the 7th millennium BCE. Today, one of the site's most notable landmarks is the palace ruins, located on the Kafala Hill. The ruins are split into two phases: the old palace, which has been poorly preserved, and the new palace. The new palace of Knossos had a surface area of approximately 13,000 square meters, making it the largest Minoan palace. Its focal point was a central court, which was probably used for ceremonial activities. The Minoan palace centers collapsed when Crete was overrun and conquered by a Mycenaean invasion from mainland Greece. However, the date of the final destruction of Knossos' palace is still unknown. During the new palace phase, the ground floor was dedicated to economic activities and contained large storage rooms. The residential quarters, which notably had toilets, were located southeast of the central court, at the foot of the grand staircase. The palace was lavishly decorated with wall paintings depicting things like bull-related sports and richly dressed women. Large stone horns of consecration, which were important Minoan religious symbols, hung prominently in the west court. Other notable parts of the palace include the theatrical area, which is believed to have served as a viewing space, the tripartite shrine, which was dedicated to the worship of an important Minoan deity historians refer to as the Mother Goddess, and the Piano Nobile, a grand space located on the palace's second floor. During his trips to Crete, archaeologist Arthur John Evans discovered several ancient tablets. They eventually led him to define the forms of Minoan writing known as Linear A and Linear B. The Minoans used these forms of writing for recording many things, including business transactions. For example, one clay tablet discovered at the Palace of Knossos was inscribed in Linear B script. The tablet detailed the transfer of coriander, often used in the perfume industry, between a man named Kyprios and another person named Twinon. The deciphering of tablets such as these has given historians great insight into many aspects of Minoan culture and society. According to myth, the half-man, half-bull Minotaur was born after Queen Pasiphae slept with a bull sent by the gods as punishment upon her. This embarrassed King Minos, but he could not bring himself to kill the Minotaur. Instead, he hid the monster in a labyrinth constructed by Daedalus. Daedalus was an important figure in Greek mythology, an ingenious inventor. He once became so jealous of his similarly clever nephew that he threw him from the top of the Athenian Acropolis. As a consequence, Daedalus was banished from Athens, though this did not prevent him from being able to get work. In Crete, he was hired by Queen Pasiphae to construct an artificial cowsuit that would allow her to seduce a bull she was particularly taken with, due to a curse from the gods. Daedalus complied, and his invention helped facilitate the birth of the Minotaur. Afterwards, Minos conscripted Daedalus to build the labyrinth, presumably as penance for his role in creating the Minotaur. But perhaps the most well-known story about Daedalus involves his son, Icaros, who used wings built by his father and flew too close to the sun, thus plummeting into the sea. Sometime after the birth of the Minotaur, King Minos' son Androgeos was killed in Athens by the same bull that impregnated his mother. An infuriated Minos demanded that Athens send 7 of their noblest men and 7 of their most virtuous women to Knossos every year. After being carried to Crete aboard a ship with black sails, the men and women would then be cast into the labyrinth to be eaten by the Minotaur. One of the Athenian youths chosen to be imprisoned in the labyrinth, Theseus, had enough of the morbid ritual. Before leaving Athens, he proclaimed he would kill the Minotaur, then return to his city on a ship flying white sails. Before entering the labyrinth, Theseus met King Minos' daughter, Ariadne, who fell madly in love with him. Ariadne provided Theseus with a thread he could unravel to help him find his way back out of the maze. Armed with this thread, Theseus entered the labyrinth, killed the Minotaur, escaped the maze, and set sail for Athens with Ariadne by his side. Sometime after the birth of the Minotaur, King Minos' son Androgeos was killed in Athens by an infuriated Minos after being carried to
I see you found your way through the maze of ruins. The Minoans played a large part in shaping Greek myths, but also in introducing influences from other places and cultures. Now, what else would you like to do? Looking for something more lively than ruins? Then let's see what else we can find.
Hello, Wanderer. May I introduce you to the Keramikos, the kiln that warms all of Athens' pottery. The art produced here is some of the most beautiful in the Greek world. I envy the potter's skills, though I'm not quite as envious of their clay-stained hands. It's bad for the nails. The Keramikos was a special neighborhood in Athens where potters created vases and containers that stood all over Greece. This tour will take you through the elaborate process needed to turn something as simple as muddy clay into ornate perfume vases and gilded wine cups. Come find me when you complete your visit, and we can talk more about what you've learned.
The Keramikos was a large, sprawling area northwest of Athens' Acropolis. While part of it was used as a graveyard, it was also dedicated to the creation of pottery. The Keramikos was so significant to the art form that its name lives on in the word ceramics. Perhaps drawn by the river, potters moved into the area and formed their own bustling community. It's believed that by the end of the 5th century BCE, hundreds of thousands of pottery vessels had been made in Athens, including everything from heavy, undecorated cooking pots to delicate and beautiful containers reserved for the most precious oils. Sadly, only around 1% of these works survive today, some only in small fragments. Raw clay from a river was hardly fit for a potter's wheel. Athenian potters used clay that was rich in iron, which created the distinctive orange-red coloring seen in Athenian pottery. But this high-quality clay needed to be handled carefully to avoid disasters in the kiln later on. The clay was first brought to settling beds, where it was mixed with water to wash out any organic debris like leaves. Once it was purified, workers kneaded the clay with their hands to push out air bubbles and create the texture necessary for a flawless finish. One of the goals of these early steps was to remove any impurities that could destroy a delicate design, or worse, render a vase unusable. Once the clay was cleaned, it was up to the potter to shape it into a vase by spinning it on a wheel or pressing it into a mold. Their choice depended on what shape they wanted for the vase, but they also considered the possible scope of its decoration. Potters did not work alone. A workshop might have had many people working together on different aspects of production. Potters collaborated with many different painters for decorating their creations. Some of these painters even became potters themselves. All in all, a single vase could be worked on by many different artists, with each one focusing on a different aspect of its design. After the pots were shaped and decorated, they were packed into kilns for the lengthy and delicate firing process. The process had 3 stages: oxidation, reduction, and reoxidation. The main purpose of the firing process was to carefully manage the clay's exposure to oxygen. The chemical reactions caused by firing gave the pots their distinctive orange-red coloring. This also turned the designs made from the clay decoration slips glossy and black. The most difficult part of the firing process was managing the fires themselves. It required an enormous amount of skill and experience to properly judge the exact temperatures needed, and even the smallest mistake could ruin several hours of work. Vases could be decorated in all sorts of ways. Before 530 BCE, Athenian vases were decorated using the black figure technique, where figures and designs were painted as dark silhouettes. At the end of the 6th century BCE, painters created a new technique called red figure, an inversion of the painting process that left the figures in red and the background in black. This gave the artist more freedom to better explore details like muscles and individual locks of hair. Designs were sketched onto the bare surface of the pot using a thin, sharp tool. Thin relief lines, which helped define subtle elements like facial features, were added using a brush made of a few stiff hairs. More elaborate vases were sometimes gilded, but these decorations were so delicate, they were most likely only added after the firing process.
You've returned! As you can see, pottery was an arduous and delicate process, but was exemplary of the skill and craftsmanship that dominated Greek art and culture. Now, is there something else you'd like to do? Of course. Please, follow me.
Welcome to Amphipolis, traveler. The Battle of Amphipolis was surely an interesting one. One might even call it anticlimactic. But that does not mean it wasn't important in the greater scheme of the Peloponnesian War. The city of Amphipolis was the site of one of the more unique battles of the Peloponnesian War. Two generals, the Athenian Cleon and the Spartan Brasidas, fought for this land in an effort to control the resources it provided. In the end, though, neither got what they wanted. Look for me when you finish your visit, and we can speak of what you've learned.
The land that would come to be known as Amphipolis was originally part of Thrace, a region inhabited by formidable semi-nomadic horsemen. Thrace was rich in gold and silver mines. It was surrounded by lush forests, making it very attractive to outside parties like Greece and Persia. By 513 BCE, Persia had managed to conquer much of Thrace, but after their defeat in 479 BCE, Athens made a play for the land. They conquered the nearby island of Thasos in 465 BCE, but the military prowess of the Thracian riders kept them out of the country's interior. It was only in 436 BCE that Athens established a solid foothold in Thrace with the founding of Amphipolis, a city on the banks of the river Strymon. During the Peloponnesian War, the Spartan general Brasidas sought a way to subvert Athenian power across the Greek world. He set his sights on capturing the coast of Thrace, hoping to seize the resources the area provided. Brasidas knew that many of the Greeks living in Thrace hated the greed and brutality of their Athenian neighbors and decided to take advantage of the situation. He set off on an expedition to Amphipolis, accompanied by 1,000 hoplites and 700 helots, and arrived before the city in the winter of 424 BCE. At Amphipolis' ramparts, Brasidas announced that he preferred to take the city peacefully and promised to allow safe passage to any inhabitants who wished to leave, in addition to sparing those who wanted to cooperate. This proposal was well received by the city's residents, and he was able to capture Amphipolis without striking a single blow. Brasidas' march on Amphipolis blindsided the Athenians. By the time they heard the news and dispatched the general Thucydides to defend Amphipolis, Brasidas had already rallied several nearby cities to help him defend the region from Athens' so-called tyranny. After half a day's journey from Thasos, Thucydides arrived at the port of Aeon, but was unable to retake Amphipolis. Athens held Thucydides responsible for the loss of Amphipolis and forced the general into exile. In spite of Brasidas' achievements, Sparta did not send him reinforcements, which forced the general to negotiate a truce with Athens to hold on to the ground he gained. The matter of how to deal with Amphipolis divided Athens. The politician Nicias, as well as the city of Sparta, hoped that peace could be negotiated. However, the popular Athenian statesman and general Cleon wanted to continue fighting the war. Indecision continued until 422 BCE, when Cleon was elected as one of Athens' strategists. This decision made it clear that the city's people were in favor of war. The truce was ended, and Cleon began his journey to Amphipolis, retaking small towns that had been conquered by Brasidas along the way. On arriving at the port of Aeon, Cleon requested troops from the King of Macedonia. He also hired several Thracian mercenaries to bolster his force's numbers. Afterwards, all Cleon could do was wait for the remainder of his reinforcements. While they waited, the Athenian forces began to resent Cleon's hesitation to attack. They saw him as soft and incompetent, especially compared to their opponent, Brasidas. Sensing the tension, Cleon decided to act without waiting for reinforcements to arrive. He set out from the port of Aeon to observe Amphipolis, setting up a camp on a nearby hill. To Cleon's surprise, Amphipolis appeared to be completely unprotected, with no guards stationed at the city's gates and ramparts. However, the city's lack of protection was only an illusion. Even so, upon seeing this, Cleon regretted that he did not bring wooden towers, which would have allowed him to easily recapture the city. Brasidas positioned his own troops in a nearby wooded area to get a better view of Cleon's army. When the Athenians began moving to set up camp, Brasidas returned to Amphipolis. He believed his army was less well-trained than the Athenians and decided to rely instead on cunning tactics and Cleon's inexperience as a military leader. Brasidas organized a two-prong attack. He would personally lead a small raid, then one of his lieutenants would follow up with a second attack shortly after, disorienting the enemy. He had barely finished formulating his plan when he saw Cleon's army pack up and retreat back towards the coast. The cowardly display made Brasidas realize that perhaps victory would be easier than he thought. After seeing Brasidas' troops return to Amphipolis, Cleon decided to fall back to the port of Aeon and once again wait for reinforcements. Unfortunately, his exact orders were confusing and contradictory, which left the Athenian forces in disarray. Brasidas took advantage of this confusion and began his attack. Cleon's forces panicked, which made them easy prey for the Spartans. 600 Athenians were killed, while the Spartans only lost 7 men. Cleon's remaining forces took refuge in Aeon, where the bodies of their comrades were eventually returned to them, though only after being stripped of their weapons. During the pitched battle between the Spartans and the Athenians, both Brasidas and Cleon were killed. The reports of their respective deaths reflect how they were perceived as military leaders. We know almost nothing about Cleon's death, other than that he was killed by a Thracian soldier. Brasidas, meanwhile, survived long enough to be taken back to Amphipolis, where he was informed of his victory. He was buried inside the city, which was considered an honor bestowed only upon heroes, and was celebrated as the true founder of Amphipolis. The Battle of Amphipolis temporarily put an end to the hostilities between Athens and Sparta. The Athenian forces returned to Piraeus, while Sparta called back the reinforcements they'd sent for Brasidas. The death of both Brasidas and Cleon encouraged the two cities to push for peace. The negotiations took time, but Sparta and Athens eventually agreed to return to the way things were before the Peloponnesian War. The resulting treaty became popularly known as the Peace of Nicias. Throughout the Greek world, it was mostly agreed that Sparta had lost the war, in spite of Brasidas' heroic efforts. The sentiment was rooted in the fact that Sparta had failed to end Athens' domination over Greece, something they had promised to do at the start of the war.
I see you're done with your tour. The Battle of Amphipolis may have briefly put an end to the Peloponnesian War, but the so-called Peace of Nicias was only temporary. It would not be long before Sparta and Athens came to blows once again. Now, is there something else you'd like to do? Very well. I hope you enjoyed your visit.